Hello and welcome to the second installment of the Forgiveness Paradox, a positive psychology perspective looking at forgiveness. So, as we start into this, we're look at the mechanics of forgiveness. I want you to think about a past transgression or the transgressor and apply that to what we study today in order to think about forgiving him or her, or it could be forgiving yourself. So, we talked about some definitions in the last segment, and the one that, from a positive psychology standpoint, that we want to look at is the giving up of the negative emotions. Okay, uh, Tengji says forgiveness, giving up the negative emotions is the core of forgiveness. So we're looking at that cognitive affective transformation that happens after uh, somebody does something to you. Uh, and then, as the victim, you make a realistic assessment of what's been done and acknowledge the perpetrator's or the transgressor's responsibility. Then you can choose, as the victim of the transgression, you can choose to cancel the debt. Okay? So when you cancel the debt, you're getting rid of all the negative emotions that are related to the transgression. You overcome feelings of resentment, overcome feelings of anger for what happened, and you remove yourself from the victim role, okay? Because a victim has no power. Victims have no power. So we've all been victims at a time, but you can't stay there, and you've got to get out of that victim mentality. So is it necessary for the person to apologize to you for you to be able to forgive them? The answer is no. Mickey's got the right idea. Uh, Once again, you don't want to put the power in somebody else's hands. That leaves you helpless. Uh, you want to make it a matter of your choice. You can forgive them without them apologizing to you. You don't need them at all to forgive them. Now, we've all heard forgive and forget. Should you forgive and forget? Uh, and so the quote on the right kind of chides you if you don't forget. Um, I disagree with that. I don't. think certain transgressions should be forgotten. Allowing abuse encourages more abuse. We'll get into more. And sometimes people won't forgive you. So if you've committed the transgression, then other people may try to guilt you, to shame you, to hold you hostage because of what you did, and they keep you hanging on. Okay, the mother in this cartoon saying, "I'm sorry you feel guilty about so many things, but then I get the pleasure of shaming you because you do." So at times you just have to bite the bullet and move on, whether the people forgive you or not, as long as you made the attempt to essentially seek forgiveness. Okay, you need to make sure that you can overcome the guilt. You can't do that unless you're willing to forgive and or be forgiven. You need to know the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is something that's put on you by somebody else. Shame is something you feel yourself. If you do something bad, then you feel ashamed. You may also feel guilty, but the guilt is placed on you from the outside. The shame comes from within. And sometimes you just have to move on. So can you forgive without forgetting? And that we go back to rumination versus processing. Remember I said processing is looking at the situation again, going over and over it, but not tapping into the negative emotions. Okay, so this quote says, "Forgiveness is not forgetting an injustice is done. It's the understanding that allows us to set aside the emotional impact of that injustice pertaining to ourselves. When we no longer hold those emotions and have an understanding for the person, we have forgiven them." Okay, I'm going to repeat that. When we no longer hold those emotions and have an understanding for the person, we have forgiven them. Now think about that. Let it sink in. Okay? Okay, now compassion is necessary for forgiveness. And that's thinking about others and being able to identify with them. Compassion requires empathy. That's feeling with somebody, not feeling for them, feeling with them. Okay? In positive psychology, we're talking about that to have compassion, the difficulty of the person that's receiving your compassion must be serious. It shouldn't be self-inflicted, and then we're able to identify with that suffering. So self-inflicted difficulties engender pity versus compassion. Does that make sense? Okay, so empathy is a big thing. You hear a lot about that these days, especially from a negative standpoint, in the sense that the President Trump has no empathy. He doesn't know how to recognize and feel the emotions of others. So empathy is walking a mile in somebody else's moccasins. It's different than sympathy. Empathy, you feel with the person. Sympathy, you feel for the person. You feel sorry for them, not with them. They're very close, but they're not the same. Children are naturally empathetic. Somebody falls down, skins their knee. The other children feel that. They've done it, so they feel that pain. They can be very empathetic. And that's a pro-social behavior and one that is required for forgiveness. So as I said, in order to forgive somebody, you have to be able to have empathy. And the way to have empathy is to understand why the person did what they did. This is sometimes confusing, and you can't always get that answer. Why did they do that? That doesn't make any sense. Why would they behave that way? But you want to try to understand the why. Sometimes it's very easy. So something that fights against compassion is contempt. And that's the indifference or the disdain for the hurt of others because we perceive it's due to their lower moral standings, character defect, mental instability, their general inferiority. Okay? And now contempt makes you feel uh, more confident and self-righteous, at least temporarily, but at the same time, you're less humane and you're more vulnerable to unconscious guilt and shame and anxiety because it violates your deeper values. But that's not generally a thought. So you can recognize contempt in people uh, by the way they curl their lips, by the way they roll their eyes. Uh, Again, our president is a master of contempt. He has disdain for just about everyone but himself. Now, one of the interesting things is that they're contagions. Compassion and contempt both are contagions. Okay, if you're around a compassionate person, you're likely to feel more compassionate. If you're around a contemptuous person, you're likely to feel more contemptuous. Uh, if you project onto people uh, your compassion, they're likely to become more compassionate, and vice versa. If you project contemptuous characterizations such as he's a loser, abuser, selfish, angry, narcissistic, they're likely to conform to that projection. That's the part of the old self-fulfilling prophecy. What about trust after somebody has transgressed you? You regain trust through empathy. Okay. After forgiveness, can you trust again? Yeah, but it has to be earned. Can you trust a child that has fibbed? Can you trust a teen that has lied? What about a spouse that has cheated? An adult who has sexually abused someone? Okay. So this is where one of the few things that I agree with Ronald Reagan on. Uh, Trust but verify. You can always check and see what somebody's doing. See how they feel, see how they act to trust them. If you have a spouse that's cheated on you, uh, then you have to be able to check up on them. And you shouldn't be made to feel guilty for doing that. Robert Enright's famous for saying, forgiveness is free, trust is earned. And pay attention to your gut, trust yourself. You know more than you think you know. Uh, and it's like the example below. You can trust somebody to be a good human resources director, but not to babysit your child. And that's okay. So if somebody has been unfaithful to you, if there's been an infidelity, if you've been done wrong, okay, how do you get over that? Initially, you're going to feel anger, you're going to be hurt. You need to have a realistic appraisal of the situation. You need to step back and take a look at it, try to take the emotion out of it, release those the negative emotions, the negative affect toward the transgressor, try to investigate what happened, and then you can move forward with your life. Uh, the victim loses the desire to punish the transgressing partner. Okay, now this is something that can be quite difficult because when you've been hurt, you want to pay the individual back. Okay, so the idea is can you lose that desire to punish the transgressing partner. That does not mean you have to reconcile with them. That does not mean you have to trust them. It does not even mean you need to be with them. The smartest thing may be to go a different direction, but you just say, see you later, not in my life. So in Christianity, we're taught you should always turn the other cheek. Okay? Should you turn the other cheek when you've been transgressed against you? Poor old Charlie Brown, every fall, Lucy pulls that football away. She always talks him into doing it again. What about someone abusing you that that you're supposed to be able to trust? Remember, tolerating abuse invites more abuse. I think if you're going to live to the letter of that saying, I like this person's attitude about it. Turn the other cheek. Here's my cheek. You can kiss it. One of the next things we need to discuss is the difference between a virtue and an issue. We often stretch and stretch and stretch to accommodate all the garbage that's tossed at us on a daily, a weekly, yearly basis, and it's usually coming from a significant other. So let's talk about it in terms of relationship. It could also be happening at a job. But we often pride ourselves and think that it's a virtue to be able to put up with so much crap. You find this quite often in addictive situations where one of the partners is codependent. They have a martyr syndrome. They put up with so much, but it's not a virtue. Now, it may be necessary to stay in a relationship if there's violence involved, but we stretch and stretch to accommodate that junk. At a certain point, that bag is going to break, okay? And if we think, even for a moment, that this stretching, this putting up with everything, makes us holy or virtuous, then we are in emotional trouble. Okay, so do you look at your issues as virtues? If so, then part of you is believing that you don't need to heal that. You don't need to heal your virtues. Okay, we only need to heal our issues. So you've got to be able to distinguish between a virtue and an issue. And putting up with crap is not a virtue. So how often do you forgive somebody? Okay, there's several sayings. The Buddha has one, forgive them 70 and 7. I looked in the Bible, and Jesus was asked how often to forgive someone their sins, and depending on the edition of the Bible, it's 70 times 70, 70 plus 7, 70 times 70. But anyway, it's a cottage industry. They make teddy bears, 70 times 70, keychains, medallions, 70 times 7. So how often do you do it? Do you forgive? I'll just, you know where I'm coming from. Tolerating abuse invites more abuse. So we can't be talking about forgiveness without talking about revenge. Okay, we live in a culture that says if somebody does something wrong to you, they have to pay for it. Somebody has to pay. Okay, revenge is often described as being sweet. It's often described as a dish best served cold, which means that the emotion should be out of it. If you can take the emotion out of it, the question is, why should you do it? One of the things that I've learned from a colleague of mine that was sat on a board, worked with women that were abused, is that not seeking revenge is forgiveness. Okay, so not seeking revenge is forgiveness. Is that enough? Yeah, I think so. And then, I'd go along with the idea that the best revenge is a life well lived. Okay, if you go on without the person, and whether they know it or not, and you don't allow them to affect you or infect you, uh, that is revenge enough. So one thing we understand about forgiveness is it's essential to heal our psychic and our emotional wounds. Okay, and you need to be able to forgive so that you can move towards your self-actualizing tendencies. Those are the tendencies that allow you to be the best you can be. In positive psychology terminology, that's called thriving and flourishing. Okay, if you are being like Ior, and you're into woundology or victim mentality, where you're always talking about how badly you've been transgressed or hurt or so forth, you cannot move forward. So one way to heal against transgressions and the transgressor is to hold a space. Uh, So, for example, if I've been transgressed against, even if the person does not apologize, even if they don't want to do anything uh, to right the wrong that they've done, even if they want to continue to hate me or for whatever reason, I can still hold a space for their healing. Okay, I can hold a space in my heart and want to send them. I want them to be better, and to heal in the world and to be happy. That way, I am not sending them uh, negative energy from a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we discussed this a little bit when we were talking about compassion and empathy. Uh, I want to be able to let go, which we'll talk about in a moment, and allow them to heal and not pull myself down by feeling negative emotions toward them. Now, must we forgive? The author of this article, which is you can also access from your Blackboard site, says no. Uh, it's not necessary to forgive. And when you read the article, I think you'll probably agree with most of what she says. So just remember that not seeking revenge is forgiveness. So you don't have to say I don't forgive you. You can just say I'm not seeking revenge. Therefore, I forgive you. Now, letting go, which is hard to do. It's easy to say, it's hard to do. Uh, Robin Williams has this quote: sometimes you have to give up on people, not because you don't care, but because they don't. Uh, he also said, I used to think the worst thing in life was to end up all alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is to end up with people that can make you feel all alone. So if you can learn to take that regret, that guilt, that hurt, and let it go. And one way to do that is to give it form, is to let it go. Then you can hold a space in your heart for the healing, and that space may be for you too. You can forgive yourself, uh, uh, and you have to learn how to let go. And you may have to let go of relationships if they continually hurt you, if they continually bring you down. It's not good for you. It's not healthy. Some relationships are toxic. They will absolutely kill you or kill your soul. So letting go, if you can give something form, you can let it go. So imagine if you're very angry or you hold a resentment against somebody, you think of it, put it into a ball in your hand. Imagine a ball in your hand. It can be a red ball to match your anger, uh, and then you put it in there, and then you physically throw it away. Go through the motion of throwing it away. And that actual physical motion of throwing something away allows you to let it go. Another way to do that is to flush it. Take that emotion, throw it in the toilet, and flush it down. Actually, push the plunger, let it flush down. Okay. Now, on the Blackboard site, there's a couple of articles about letting go that come out of my book, and one from Tal Ben Shahar. And so they're part of your reading, and one of them will explain better how to give an emotion form and to let it go. Now, one of the hardest things that we face is self-forgiveness. Okay, it's much easier to forgive somebody else than it is ourselves. Nobody beats us up like we do. So you have to take responsibility for what you've done. You got to fess up. You got to take accountability. You got to fix it. You got to let go and move forward. Okay, and prevent those negative feelings from interfering with your positive living. Does that make sense? If not, think about it for a minute. Go back over this. You've got to be able to forgive yourself. You're a good person. So earlier, I mentioned about a couple of the steps in the 12-step program. But if you look at the 12 steps, if you look at the middle steps in a 12-step program, it's a great guide to how to get to the point where you can let go of things. So first, you examine your conscience. They call it make a searching and fearless moral inventory. Then you admit what you did wrong. Then you're ready to have those defects removed. Okay. Then you ask to remove those defects, and you're going to fix it. Then you have to be willing to make amends to the people that you've harmed. Now, in the 12 steps, they say you make amends whenever possible, except when to do so would injure themselves or others. So you wouldn't want to say, for example, if you had an affair with somebody and you're sorry, you want to ask for forgiveness, you don't go to their house and knock on the door and tell them, where their spouse might hear you, that, oh gee, you're sorry that you had an affair with them. So that's just a kind of a wild example of what I'm talking about. And then you continue to take the personal inventories and promptly admit when you were wrong. Now, as usual, in order to do those steps, you've got to know who you am. Now, another great intervention that I came up with is called Shields Up. It's explained in your there's a link to the written description of Shields Up on the Blackboard site in this weekly folder on forgiveness. But the idea is that you put up a semi-permeable shield that just lets in the good and forces the bad to stay out. So Shields Up can be very important. So there are several other positive psychology interventions. One is let a grudge go every day. And then when you feel annoyed, even with a justification, take the high road. Don't tell anybody how you feel. That's essentially Michelle Obama's advice. When they go low, we go high. And then there's a forgiveness letter. It's like a gratitude letter that you're getting ready to write. The difference with the forgiveness letter is don't send it, okay? But read it every day for a week. You're asking for forgiveness The people may not want to give you forgiveness, and so the letters can work against you if you actually send it. So don't send it. What you're trying to do is get it set up for yourself. So if you're struggling with forgiveness, or you have a lot of resentments or self-pity, start off by trying to find out more about who you am. Okay? It's, as we've talked about, it's simple, but it's not easy. One of the best tools is reflection. You may need to get therapy, counseling, or see a spiritual director, but you've got to find out who you am. Okay? Once you know who you am, then you can set boundaries. Then you can take, you can hold a space in your heart for someone else's healing and your own healing, and you can build your self-image, your self-esteem, and your self-worth. So, how do you know if you've forgiven someone? Can you wish the person well, whether you're in their life or not? Can you hold a space for their healing? Can you let go? If you can do those things, then you have forgiven someone. Okay? So let's talk about what we've learned. You've learned to let go. You've learned to flush it. We talked about the fourth step of searching fearless moral inventory, examining your conscience. We did not talk about the reach method, gets too long and complicated. But if you want to, you can look it up. Worthington writes about that. We talked about a forgiveness letter. There's shields up, and then hold a space for the healing. And then above all, you've got to know who you am. So, what do we know? You can't change the past. Forgive, but don't forget. Tolerating abuse encourages more abuse. Forgiving helps create positive emotions. That works towards our build and broaden and build. Forgiveness is free, trust is earned. You want to cultivate empathy and compassion. You've got to learn to let go. You've got to find out who you am. And the best revenge is a life well lived. So, here's your forgiveness meditation. I am sorry for you, for all the negatives that you have experienced, and for how you are living your life as a result. Please forgive me for all that you hold against me, imagined or real. I forgive you for all you have done against me, real or imagined. Thank you for the love you have shown me and for the lessons I have learned during our relationship. I love you and I respect your humanity. I release you to your destiny. I pray for your healing. I hold a space in my heart and in my soul for your healing.